Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 188, season 4, episode 28. We stand on the edge of the holiday of Passover. It's just a couple of days away. You can say it right now. You can say it that way. There's no other way to describe it. There's no other way to say it. It's simply a fact that this is the week of Passover, and it's right here. But obviously, the week's worth of events maybe have overshadowed to some degree. As I mentioned last week, sort of, limping into the holiday a little bit, in denial to some degree that the holiday is coming. The holiday is upon us. The cleaning has commenced and has gotten into high gear. The moving out of all of the products that we can no longer we will not be able to use any longer, bringing in all of the Passover-related, matzah-related foods, leavened and unleavened, for the unleavened experience of a lifetime, if you remember the quote. That's where we are. But let's begin, as always, with the win of the week and the learning of the week. The win of the week, personal win of the week, is that yesterday I ran my personal best in terms of distance, I guess of time, obviously, in a 7-kilometer run. So this running thing has sort of picked up to some degree and sort of have a longer-term goal I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in mind. But 7K yesterday, it was a big deal for me. That's the longest I've ever gone. The time, in terms of how long it took me, is something that I'm working on. The distance, of course, I'm still working on. I would say squeezing in more kilometers into that same time frame. But that's a big win. Sort of pushing myself physically beyond what I thought was a limit at 5, which admittedly 5 was a limit for me even before I even started running any 5s. So that was a big win of the week personally. The bigger win of the week, let's say from a national perspective, is the miraculous events of last Saturday night going into Sunday morning here with the Iran retaliation attack at Israel. So the miraculous statistics and data on what came out of that, or what little impact it had on the people in the land of Israel. Obviously the one young girl who was injured, and she should have a full and speedy recovery. But it was a miracle. I think we underestimate and undervalue the miraculous nature of it, simply because it happened in the skies and in the heavens. And yes, we heard some of it, but to appreciate sort of how serious an attack it was, and how incredibly powerful was the defense as a coalition of countries that don't, typically speaking, get together in those manners. Amazing. It's really an amazing win. Really important. Really important. God forbid had anything gotten through and caused the damage that was intended. So that's a big national win of the week. Unfortunately, it has not led to the end of the war in Gaza or the return of the hostages. We're still hoping and praying for that, of course. The learning of the week is simply the idea that progress takes a long time. It's slow. So as I've talked about this a couple times in a couple of the learnings over the last number of weeks, from a work perspective, a consulting perspective, a coaching perspective, you really have to celebrate the small victories that come when they come. Because if it's one thing, if you move the needle on one item in 1 week in this capacity, in this role, you've done a lot. If you move 2 things, you're really ahead of the pace. And so the idea here is to try to move or gain some sort of traction or victory each time, each day, each week, and over the long haul, have a collection of victories that prove ultimate success. Really important learning. I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. I'm trying to let it sink in and appreciate that. I'm trying to use that as an evaluative measure for the work that I'm trying to do. Okay, so Coaching the Bible this week, our topic of the week is orchestrating outcomes. We've talked a lot over time in Coaching the Bible that we control inputs, we don't control outputs. We've talked about the Bill Walsh book, The Score Takes Care of Itself, and his meticulous approach to inputs and less focus on the outputs, focusing in on what he can and cannot control. And so I thought a little bit here today, the idea of orchestrating outcomes in the context of the holiday of Passover, and in the space of being a really, really good leader which is this. I did a comparison. I was thinking about this. The production of a Seder, here in Israel, one Seder, overseas, two Seders, that event is like producing a mass event. Having done many dinners over the many years and fundraising events, there is a parallel in the structure between those two kinds of events that match. And when you think about the Seder event in that way, maybe it changes the way you go about it. So let's sort of step back for a second. When I did dinners, we had sort of a thinking that was going on, or at least I did, and the person that was my team had an idea about how we wanted to handle those events. The board had one idea in mind. Raise as much money as possible, spend as little money as possible. I mean, that was brass tacks what they were looking to do. Outcome for the board, money raised. Outcome for the fundraiser, me, at least one of them was also matching with what the board had desired. But there was a whole sort of wisdom and approach, structure, plan in place to make that event go and to make that event successful. In the same vein is the production of a Seder on Passover night. There is the global goal, which is that there are certain commandments that need to be fulfilled on that night. Eating of the matzah, retelling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Those are the main ones. But if we don't do the work in preparation for it, then we haven't gotten anywhere. The Bible spends a ton of time talking about the Exodus of Egypt. It goes into great detail, the story, the book of Exodus, obviously, but it also plays out over the course of time in the other books, right? Books 3, 4, and 5 of the 5 books of Moses. It comes up multiple times during the course of the remainder of the Old Testament. And it plays a role, in all honesty, the Exodus, in the other major faiths in the world, and as a part of the freedom story of peoples around the world throughout history. So it's a monumental event in that way. At the same time, it's a very personal thing because each and every one of us has the responsibility or the obligation to fulfill those commandments on that night. As the person leading that event, let's say in my case as the father in the household, so maybe it's an additional responsibility. My wife, also additional responsibilities. Our children have a different set of responsibilities going in. And so there's an orchestration that has to go on there, which is very powerful and very important, because if it doesn't go on there, then let's be honest, it doesn't turn out as well. Last year, at this time, I talked about the idea of questions. What I meant at the time was I told a story about a person who had been a congregant of mine who struggled to lead a Seder. And the reason that he struggled to lead a Seder was because he had not grown up with a very strong Jewish background. He did not come with a lot of education. He was a returnee to faith later in life. And so his children had more to share than he did. And the advice that I gave last year, not the advice I had given at the time, was to ask a ton of questions. Right? The game of coaching, the space of coaching, asking the great questions is how you get great answers. Having great conversations through great questions, you can do that even if you don't have the background by remaining curious, by remaining focused, and actively paying attention to what's going on. That was the approach then. But I think there's more to it. Because even if you're asking the right questions, there is an orchestration that can go on, that should go on, that sets up the outcome that you desire. And so to think of yourself as the conductor of an orchestra on that night, that you're playing the role of someone who's pulling together people at a certain space, in a certain time, with a certain set of requirements to get that harmony and synthesis together so that everyone has a positive, meaningful, wonderful experience and walks away having done what needs to be done, that's an incredible amount of work. That requires planning. It requires thought. It requires inputs. It requires tasks being done in advance. It's effectively event production. And if we don't do the event production, then we get the event that we should expect, which is less than optimal. And so we have to think about that. When it comes up for me this year particularly, was the idea that on some level I felt that this year's Seder is different. Why is this night different than all other nights? But why is this year's Seder different than other Seders? One, it has to do on the global scene about what's going on around us. Never in my life have I experienced, or will I have experienced, the Seder with all the things that are swirling around us at the moment. Never in my life did I expect that some of the language that is recited as part of the ceremony of the Magid section, of the retelling of the story of Exodus, so accurate and true and felt as much as it feels right now. The idea that in every generation, they are standing up to try and kill us. That feels very true, especially in the last week, if not in the last 6 months, but very real right now. I think most of the people here have never experienced it. I was talking to someone, mentioned him a couple of times on the podcast. It's a gentleman who comes to our house for charity on a regular basis. He's, I would say, probably 20 years older than me. And I asked him straight out, have you ever remembered a Passover coming in under the same sort of headspace as this one? He grew up here, he grew up in Israel, he grew up in Jerusalem. He said no. Other wars happened at other times of the year, nothing like this. It's almost impossible to imagine families sitting down to a Seder talking about freedom when their family members are hostages, their family members were killed. Like, it's heavy. So it's different in that way. And so the preparation has to be different. Two, it's different in our household, particularly I feel like this year, because it feels like for the first time maybe, that it's what I would call an adult Seder, in the sense that everyone, the gap, even though the gaps in age is still the same, where everyone is in life is closer to than when it was when, children were 8 or 9 years old, right? So the youngest person at the table is 15. It's a different kind of experience, and therefore requires a different kind of preparation. So on orchestrating outcomes, if we want to orchestrate the outcome of a Seder, or in the leadership space, we want to orchestrate different results for our team, then we have to do things differently. And so if you're producing in that way, let's say you're the leader of a team and you have to do an event, so then you have to produce that event differently. It's not the same. So we have to think through the construct of what that's going to be that makes us the most successful through all the things that we're trying to do and accomplish, right? Very important kind of business. Appreciating, first and foremost, that all the great acts, is a great quote that I saw, all the great acts are made up of small deeds. It requires a lot of small to get to the great. That's sort of the learning that I got earlier. But it's really important to sort of keep these things in mind. There's a great quote also from Colin Powell, which I saw. There are no secrets to success. It is the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Preparation, hard work, learning, all the things that go into making things successful. And so what I want to sort of do here with you in the remaining time that I have in this week's podcast, which is not a lot of time, is to sort of think this all the way through. How do I do this? How do I orchestrate outcomes, success, in a way differently than I did before? Because I am the producer. So if I'm running the Seder, if I'm leading the fundraiser, I'm leading the gala dinner, whatever it is, the company 5K, 10K race, I have certain things that I have to do. Number one, I have to be a visionary in terms of the leadership and the structure and the thinking, how I want to think about it. Number 2, I have to be really strategic in the planning that I'm going to do. Number 3, I have to be really smart with all the resources that I have and don't have to maximize. Number 4, I have to really be the team leader. I really have to be the captain of this ship as it sets sail out there. So this could be the case if it's a 5,000 person event. This could be the case if it's a 2-person event. This could be the case if I'm sitting alone by myself and I have to do something. How do I prepare that out? And also have to be a massively effective communicator to get the things that I want done. Problem solver, of course, and get to execution, right? So those are the main sort of global ideas that I want to think about, that I want to put out there. But if I have to then put that into play, I have to sort of think of the following thing. Number 1, I have to think first and foremost, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes that I'm seeking here? All of them. This is something I do a lot with people in coaching. I did this a lot when I was doing fundraising campaigns specifically. Very much in the first conversation with people was focusing on what it looked like if we succeeded. It's a great quote from someone by the name of Gregg, I think it's Gregg Barnes. Maybe I have that wrong. It's not Gregg Barnes. Gregg Braden, sorry about that, Gregg Braden, which says this: to create reality, focus beyond the outcome as if it has already happened. And that's what I would do. Work with a client, I would say to them, what does it look like if you won? What does it look like if you succeeded? Same way here. If you're producing a Seder this week, what would it look like at the end if the Seder was a success? If you're producing an event, what would it look like if this event was deemed a success? Crucial question. So if it's a monetary outcome, that we raised X amount of money, that we set a high, medium, and low goal, and that we got into the spaces, hopefully, of the high goal, that we got there. 1. 2, that everyone had a great experience participating. Right? Of course. So if you're looking at the Seder, that everybody had a good experience, everybody is, felt good when it's over. They felt like it was good. You could see during the course of the event itself, people are engaged, they're participating, they're focused, they're learning, they're growing, they're having fun, all those things. 3, they want to come back. 4, that the stories were told, that the images that were shared resonated with everybody. There's a lot of different outcomes that we're looking to seek. There's a main outcome, maybe, and then there are sub-outcomes. And then we have to decide ultimately for ourselves if, in the course of getting to those results, did we get the accomplishment that we wanted, right? So that's first. We've got to set the frame for how that is. Now, with respect to a Seder and certain other events, some of the frame already exists, which is really helpful. So at the Seder itself, the text, the basic text exists. The commandments that need to be fulfilled exist. The rest very much relies on you. The energy you bring, the music and the sounds and the tunes that you bring, the words of inspiration that are shared, whether they are the ones that are shared year over year, the stories that are told, they have to hit. When the kids were little, I would do tricks at the table to keep it interesting and exciting. We would, quote unquote, split the sea. We would turn things from water to blood. We would do all kinds of things to keep it interesting. We would have things that were like jumping toys that looked like frogs. All that stuff worked when kids are 5, 6, 7, 8. When they're 20 and 18 and 15 and 22, whatever it is, that's got to change. That's not going to work anymore. Same thing with an event. You cannot bring a group of adults and have them play with Legos at an event and feel like that's going to be a success for the event that you're trying to do. So first thing very much is the outcome. Looking at the outcomes that we're trying to do. Now that we have the outcomes, what does success look like? We can back into the outcomes or walk our way into the outcomes by creating the inputs that we need for success. So that's managing team, that's getting the right people on the team to make it successful. 2, that's getting the right venue so that it works. Again, you're not going to have your dinner outside on the top of a mountain in 100-degree weather. Not going to work. You want to get the venue proper. Appreciate the resources that you have, making sure that we know what the budget is. We're not going to do a blowout event in our house for the Seder. We're not going to blow out the budget for the year on the event. It's just not the way to do smart business and smart leadership. It just doesn't simply work. And so we want to think about how we're going to engage the audience. As I mentioned, that when the kids were little, we would do tricks, all kinds of other stuff. When they got older, I did a little bit of like identification, matching with cards, historical facts and figures, stuff like that. Maybe that has to shift as people get older. I actually asked a question this week of a mentor of mine. How do you handle an adult environment, an adult Seder experience that's different than when the kids are little? What do you do differently to make that still resonate, to make that still meaningful and impactful when in fact the audience has changed? They grew up. It's not their fault, but they grew up. That's reality of it, right? So all of these things that really help to help us understand orchestrating the outcomes. This is how you get to success. So again, that first question, what are the outcomes I'm looking to do? What does it look like if we succeeded? Now let's talk about maybe potentially the pitfalls that may get in the way of that success. What are we worried about? What are we concerned about? That was usually very often the second question I would ask people about. What are you worried about here? What are you concerned about having as a factor? Maybe it's the balance of ages. Maybe it's the educational background. Maybe it's the size of the audience that let's say you're doing a Seder for 50 people, or you're doing, an event that's going to have 1,000 people at it, as opposed to an event that has 100 people at it. What concerns you about that shift and that change? Who do you need as participating in the event from the team perspective when it's a really big audience or a rather diverse audience versus when it's an intimate audience or homogeneous kind of a group? Obviously, you're going to plan like crazy because the famous quote, it's attributed to Benjamin Franklin, but I've heard it from a lot of other places, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And so not planning and not putting the effort out at the outset just simply doesn't work. By not getting the audiovisual equipment and the tech right for your conference in advance and testing it and testing it and testing it before you go live and then going live and it being a clunker, that doesn't work. That's the level of planning necessary. Now you want to think about, let's say, engaging. So if we're thinking about a Seder, we're talking about certain things. Maybe it's certain themes we want to lean into this year. Certain things we want to not focus on this year. Maybe this is the year we focus on concepts and freedom. Maybe we focus this year on what's hard about becoming free. Maybe we're on the other side of that. Maybe we want to talk about, innocent victims. Maybe we want to talk about people who are suffering right now. Maybe we have faith issues. We're struggling with a little bit of our belief. It's okay. If that's the subject matter, we can't do all those are heavy. We're going to pick one, we're going to pick two, and think about a couple of things we want to think about, questions we want to ask, anecdotes we want to share, stories we want to pull from our past, things we want to just sort of put out there, and think about how we engage that audience. How do we get people to communicate and to participate? It's not a soliloquy. It's not a one-person monologue. It's not a frontal lecture in these situations. We want participation. We want audience involvement. Then we want to make sure as best as we can that we execute as precisely as possible. The event shows up. We don't want it to be a stinker. We don't want it to be a dud. We want to do what we can. God forbid the situation arises where you're about to start and the lights go out. I shouldn't even say it out loud. But you want to execute at a high level. So there's coordination that's involved. There's an execution strategy that's involved. There's a communication piece that's involved. There's leadership that's involved that helps you get to the outcomes that you desire. Is it possible that you'll get to the outcomes even without that? Absolutely. That is a possibility. That does happen. But that's you relying on chance rather than you relying on you and the level of meticulous preparation and input that you're putting into a situation to get to the results that you desire. I wouldn't recommend doing an audience feedback survey at the end of your Seder. I think that's probably not good form or a good idea. But afterward, privately, you can say, hey, how was that? How was the Seder this year? How was that dinner this year? You can do a quick action, an after-action review, an immediate after-action review, just getting quick takeaways, what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better, and then do a longer version of that later on. That's how you do this. That's how you get the outcomes. This is the template, strategy, structure for really anything that you're going to do as a leader, certainly as an event planner, certainly as a Seder producer, but I think it's very much a good structure to sort of work from. Step back, think in advance, walk it all the way through. What does success look like? What are my concerns? What does failure look like? Who do I need? What are the resources that I need? What are the things I'm going to execute on? What are the messages that I want as takeaways from what it is that we're trying to do? How do we get to the success ultimately that we're looking for in the execution of the plan that we're putting out there? These are the way in which we get to the results that we want. Instead, this week of finishing with a quote, let's finish with a blessing. Let's bless us. Let's bless ourselves. Let's bless our families and our friends that they should have a happy, healthy, and enjoyable holiday upcoming. May we see more miracles before the holiday itself arrives. May we merit to live in the moment and enjoy the moments that we have and appreciate the people that are around us, have a massive amount of gratitude for them, their presence in our lives. Let us share that with them. Let's create the right environment for these experiences. Let's share the outcomes. Let's share the desired messages. Let's be part of it. Let's be present for it. Let's execute at the highest level of success. And let's have a happy holiday. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week.